Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News Tonight. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Ukraine endures relentless bombings while Russia gains ground at great cost. NATO membership remains Kyiv's goal, but the alliance is divided. More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. Moscow pulls ship from Syria as rebels advance. Georgian opposition leader beaten and arrested in brutal crackdown. Polish elite units simulate radioactive scenarios. NATO leaders gathered in Brussels to address the growing threat from Russia and its war in Ukraine. Discussions included financial support for Ukraine, enhanced missile and air defenses, and countering hybrid threats. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski emphasized the importance of strengthening NATO's capabilities to meet these challenges. Our defense correspondent, Marek Steele, has more.
The two-day summit of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels has come to an end. A key topic here yesterday and today remained the war in Ukraine and NATO's support for Kyiv. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, said that NATO allies were committed to protecting Ukrainian infrastructure. Rutte also called on allies to ramp up support for Kyiv.
Allies are working to deliver on the financial pledge of 40 billion euros in security assistance for Ukraine in 2024. And I expect the new command in Wiesbaden, the NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine, to be fully operational by the end of this year. But we must do more than just keep Ukraine in the fight. We must provide enough support to change the trajectory of this conflict once and for all.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who also took part in this summit, said that Ukraine may soon face the difficult decision on a further mobilization of troops in the face of Russian advances on the front lines. But what he said is that NATO guarantees training and the necessary equipment for every soldier that Ukraine will mobilize. Ukraine, however, was not the only topic here today and yesterday in Brussels. NATO foreign ministers discussed NATO defenses and threats as well. Rutte, the Secretary General, said that NATO would step up intelligence sharing to improve the protection of critical infrastructure in the face of acts of hostile sabotage, which Mark Rutte said are being carried out by Russia and China. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski spoke about these operations. Let's take a listen.
I have raised Poland's demands regarding the drafting of operational plans featuring real capabilities, the updating and strengthening of missile defense and air defense, the issue of Ukraine, but also hybrid threats, sabotage, arson across NATO member states, as well as Russia's information warfare against countries like Georgia, Moldova and Romania, which is particularly important in the context of our presidential elections in May next year.
Allegations about Russian operations against NATO member states are being reported across Europe. Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky, who also attended the meetings in Brussels, said that up to 100 suspicious incidents that have occurred recently in Europe can be attributed to Russia. The latest such incident concerns the cutting of telecommunications cables at the bed of the Baltic Sea. A China flagged ship apparently cut through these cables, and there are allegations that this was not a regular accident and that this may have been an act of sabotage, and fingers are being pointed at Russia. Marek Steele, Brussels, TVP World.
German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has stated that Berlin may send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if a ceasefire is achieved. Now, this raises questions about Poland and other nations' willingness to follow suit. Peter Mischuk reports.
Sending German soldiers to Ukraine in the current situation is out of the question, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said, but the country's top diplomat has declared.
German soldiers could be deployed only under the condition of a real ceasefire.
But her idea doesn't seem to have gained traction among Polish officials. When asked about the possibility, Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz refused to speculate about a plan that hasn't been put forward yet.
Poland will participate in alliance decision-making. It's my firm belief that it should not be one country, not two countries, but the whole alliance which has to respond.
And Poland will tread lightly and not intervene in Ukraine single-handedly.
We will not declare such things without consulting our allies. Certainly the Polish government will not do anything to bring Poland into wartime.
For now, allies are sticking to providing Ukraine with financial aid and military assistance in various capacities.
Due to the risk of a global conflict, I consider the intervention of NATO troops under the NATO banner impossible. On the other hand, each state within the alliance has its autonomy and can make individual decisions regarding the supply of weapons, the participation of military instructors on the territory of Ukraine, or training on its own territory, the way Poland does.
With growing political uncertainty, time pressure is mounting on European politicians. They appear to be upping their Ukraine aid efforts less than 2 months shy of Donald Trump taking over as US president. The incumbent president has earlier said he would end the war in Ukraine by his inauguration day.
I wait with anticipation what President Trump will do after the 20th of January, what kind of ideas he has. There are various scenarios being discussed, but none of them seem to be yet ready to be implemented. So it's a completely premature discussion.
With the war in Ukraine now exceeding 1,000 days, political leaders, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron, have allegedly been in talks over sending troops or private military contractors to Ukraine, according to French daily Le Monde. But as of now, nothing definite has been decided.
Russia's military commitments are increasingly strained. In addition to the full-scale war in Ukraine, Moscow supports regimes in Africa and now faces challenges in Syria. Reports indicate rebel advances are forcing pro-Damascus forces to retreat, even threatening Russia's critical naval base in Tartus. John Todd has the story.
These pictures from Russia's Ministry of Defense show the Navy testing a new generation hypersonic cruise missile known as the Zircon off the coast of Syria. But this may be little more than a smokescreen. Reports suggest that Moscow, which backs President Bashar al-Assad with a heavy presence in Syria, could be fleeing a key regional naval base as rebel forces sweep south. In a lightning offensive over the past week, rebels led by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, known as HTS, have taken Syria's second city, Aleppo, and are continuing to advance on several fronts. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the rebel forces saw the Kremlin and other supporters were looking the other way.
What we've just seen in Syria with the offensive by HTS reflects the fact that Assad's key backers, key allies, whether it's Russia, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, have all, in different ways, been distracted, notably by problems of their own making.
Also speaking at Wednesday's NATO meeting, Britain's foreign minister was more explicit.
And as we look across the world with war here on our continent in Europe, with the tremendous aggression that we're seeing across the Middle East, with the hand of Iran so present in the Middle East, and with this rising conflict in Sudan and now in Syria, there is one country whose hand is in so much of it, and that is Russia.
Residents in Aleppo are desperate to flee as Russian and Syrian jets bomb rebel-held territory. Moscow pledged emergency support for Damascus. Ukraine's main intelligence directorate reports that mercenaries will be drafted from Africa. But that poses risks for the Kremlin. Security experts say Russia has too few boots on the ground in Africa as it is.
The numbers of Russian troops that have been sent and the mercenaries, the Wagner mercenaries, are insufficient in number to replace the some 30,000 troops that have left Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger.
For the moment, Russia is moving forces from one hotspot to another. Many are asking how long Moscow's war machine can sustain this level of demand.
Large parts of western Ukraine were plunged into darkness on Tuesday as Russia persists with its attack on the country's energy grid. Amid this ongoing crisis, Ukrainians are turning to grassroots initiatives to reinforce and diversify their energy infrastructure. Our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Katerji, has a story.
Russia's campaign of airstrikes against Ukraine's energy infrastructure continued on Tuesday, as authorities in the western Ukrainian city of Ternopil reported the third Russian drone strike in the space of a week, leaving large parts of the city without power. Since Russia's full-scale invasion began, Ukraine's power plants have been attacked more than 190 times. With Ukraine's energy grid already seriously degraded after years of Russian attacks, operating in 2024 at less than half the level it was in 2023, there is a growing concern in Kyiv at how the country will be able to cope throughout the cold winter months.
I am grateful to all our repair crews, to every employee of energy companies who are now mitigating the consequences of Russian strikes and protecting the system. This diligent work is very important in every region, at every facility. And they are responsible not only for their specific facility, but for the whole country, for the resilience of our entire state and the protection of all our people. We must do our utmost now at all levels, from the government and the Ministry of Energy to all our regions and communities.
With Ukraine's energy ministry under real pressure, some independent non-governmental organizations are stepping up to try and support Ukraine's energy needs. TVP World spoke to the founder of one such initiative, the Energy Act for Ukraine Foundation, on how the work they were doing to support Ukraine is making a difference.
Our NGO practically builds solar power plants with energy storages for schools and hospitals and other social infrastructure in Ukraine. And I find this work very important because a Ukrainian energy system is generally centralized, so we're all dependent on heat and electricity for one source of energy. And as Russian missile attacks are happening on this centralized energy system, we need decentralized energy system.
The Ukrainian government is hoping NGOs like the Energy Act for Ukraine Foundation will be able to plug some of the gaps in Ukraine's energy grid.
But with Russia showing no signs of stopping its attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, Ukraine's energy ministry is going to need much more support from its international partners and from initiatives like these. It's Oz Katerji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Demonstrations in Tbilisi and other Georgian cities have entered their seventh day, fueled by anger over the government's decision to suspend EU negotiations and allegations of election fraud by the ruling party. Tensions escalated further today when an opposition leader was severely beaten and arrested. Our correspondent Dar Arlith is in Tbilisi, and here's his report.
Day 7 of the protests here in Tbilisi continue. Just a few days ago, there were tens of thousands of people on the streets. Last night, according to an official estimate, over 200,000 people came to the capital of Georgia to protest against this government. Of course, they want new elections, they want free and fair elections, they want a path to the European Union, and they're out here in huge numbers peacefully showing the government that that is their demand. Now, if you look behind me, just over here, you see the police lining up. Soon they will crack down on this protest, as they have done night after night. We know that now over 300 people have been put in jail and detained. The Coalition for Change, which is one of the opposition parties here in Georgia, well, one of their 4 leaders was arrested today by police without a warrant, without any justification for doing so. And when the police detained this leader, they knocked him out, actually unconscious, and took him away. The protests are likely to continue here in Georgia until their demands are met. Of course, the ruling Georgian Dream not wanting to do so, saying that they will squelch these protests until they're successful in doing so. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
Recent events in Seoul have raised concerns in Poland regarding its procurement of South Korean equipment for the Polish armed forces. South Korea's president, now facing impeachment after a brief imposition of martial law, has added to global instability. Despite this turmoil, experts remain confident that relations between Poland and South Korea will continue without major disruption. Aisi Abacha has more on the story.
Poland has been bolstering its defense capabilities by acquiring advanced military systems from South Korea. So far, the country has received multiple deliveries, including 8 shipments of K2 tanks this year, enhancing the Polish armed forces' operational readiness. Now, due to the recent announcements of martial law in South Korea and its subsequent lifting, concerns have emerged regarding potential issues that could affect this partnership.
We have a natural expectation that after $17 billion worth of arms sold in Korea, they will open up to Polish products such as Polish meat and Polish dairy.
Experts, however, have expressed their confidence to TVP World of the bipartisan nature of South Korean politics and business.
South Korea is very keen to export stuff, and arms is kind of a new thing. They've become quite quickly a very big arms exporter. I mean, we know them for their Hyundai cars and their Samsung phones.
Poland wants 1,000 K2 tanks, a piece of equipment comparable to the M1 Abrams, and has already acquired 180 of them. The country has also received 218 K9 self-propelled howitzers. Additionally, Warsaw has procured 322 cassis for the Krab self-propelled howitzer, hundreds of K4 automatic grenade launchers, and 400 Raycold light armored vehicles. The military purchases of the Polish government were made thanks to a credit attributed by the South Korean government, and this credit needs to be approved in the budget that is controlled by the parliament, who is now impeaching the president. Former Polish economy minister and deputy prime minister, now president of Poland Asia Chamber of Commerce, Janusz Piechociński, expressed his confidence to TVP World about the smooth continuation of cooperation between Poland and South Korea.
Korea is on our side in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict within the framework of the G7. Secondly, it is the largest Asian investor in Poland. The most important thing is that Korea is a solid political and economic partner, will not translate into any disruptions in the very positive Korea-Poland relations.
Now, what remains to be seen in the upcoming days is how long it will take for the South Korean parliament to put in place a caretaker government and continue business as usual.
Hungary faces significant economic challenges as the forint hits a 2-year low against the euro, and economic growth remains among the EU's slowest. Discontent over these conditions is bolstering support for the opposition ahead of the 2026 elections. Franciszek Pilis reports.
With 2024 coming to an end in around a month, there is not much time left for Budapest to lift its poor economic performance, as Hungary slips into a technical recession. According to the European Commission's latest data, Hungary's economic growth over the past year equaled 0.6%, one of the lowest across the European Union. In 2025, it's expected to increase to 1.8%, lower than what Prime Minister Viktor Orbán recently said he's aiming for.
This year, the European Union may grow 1%, unless some radical economic policy change occurs, which I don't think will happen. Then, the Union will not be able to break out of the range of GDP growth between 0 and 3%. This is not enough for us. So the first and most important element of economic neutrality is that we need to lift economic growth into the 3% to 6% range.
That's not all, however, as Budapest is also facing a historic 14.9% drop in investments and a 2-year low of the forint, the Hungarian currency, versus the euro. Not only that, but Moody's, an international credit ratings agency, downgraded its outlook on Hungary's investment-grade sovereign rating from stable to negative, citing the potential continued freeze on EU funds. The unstable situation in Hungary has forced some of its residents to look for a life outside of their home country.
Mainly the issues of pension, the economic situation, the social safety net, healthcare, among others, made us decide to try to live our lives abroad.
Others, however, seek to hold strong until the 2026 election. As a force alternative to the Fidesz party, which has been in power non-stop since 2010, rises to political fame.
We need a change for a more livable country. In my personal opinion, we have had enough of this Fidesz era. What they are doing now is really obnoxious.
Péter Magyar, the most prominent Hungarian opposition figure, saw his party, TISA, top the most recent opinion polls at 47% of support, sporting an 11% advantage over Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party among decided voters.
I do believe that Péter Magyar and his TISA party are a threat to Viktor Orbán's rule, and current opinion polls reflect their growing popularity, currently way ahead of Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party.
According to Magyar, his main objective is freeing around 20 billion euro of EU funds that were frozen by the bloc in response to Viktor Orbán's policies. Apart from raising living standards, the move would also encourage foreign investment, which would lead to more stable financing of Hungary's debt.
Polish counterterrorism units conducted drills in Bydgoszcz today, simulating scenarios involving radioactive materials. Ovidiusz Nicea was on site to cover the elite units in action.
Explosions, rifle fire, people in hazmat suits, and a police chase. What we saw here was a training in dealing with radioactive and contaminated threats.
Coordination of services is critical. Exercises like this are done to prepare for the worst. And there is no way that any of the services can work alone. That means the police have to work with the fire department, with the emergency medical services, to know how to do their jobs in the event of such an emergency.
Każda maszyna, żeby funkcjonowała, musi mieć tryby właściwie pracujące.
Involved in this training were police, fire department, and rescue units. They have all highlighted how important it is to cooperate in such a situation.
This particular operation, that is, these anatomical activities that we did here, was a cooperation between the police and the fire department. In addition, as a chemical rescue group, we are prepared to decontaminate and administer active foams that will deactivate disinfection from the affected person. We have to remove these factors, in this case the radiation contamination from the clothing, from the body of this injured person, here on the spot, in the field conditions, one might say, so this medical assistance can be provided safely later.
This training is co-organized by the European Commission, and even though only Polish forces, only Polish services were involved in this drill, we had here observers from different member countries of the European Union and the United States who have assessed the readiness of Polish services in dealing with radioactive threats. From Bydgoszcz for TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicea.
And as the European Union navigates security challenges amid the Ukraine war, debates over military aid, peacekeeping, and long-term stability takes center stage. With Poland assuming the presidency of the Council of the EU in 2025, priorities like enlargement and strategic cooperation with Serbia are gaining momentum. How can the EU balance immediate security needs with broader geopolitical goals? Joining us today on TVP World to discuss this is Vladimir Bilčík, Slovakian MEP and member of the European People's Party. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
A very good evening. I will just make one correction. Former MEP, I finished my mandate in 2024. So very good evening to you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the correction. Now, my question would be what are some of the steps that the EU can take now to ensure the military aid to Ukraine builds its negotiation power going forward?
Well, look, we've said for the past number of years since Russia's brutal and ongoing invasion, we will do what it takes to defend Ukraine. And I think it was very clear when Kaja Kallas visited just a few days ago Kiev that her message was Ukraine must win. So we must concentrate on all the efforts which will ensure that this is indeed the case. It is ultimately Ukraine's decision what victory means. But I think for all of us in Europe, we have to make sure Ukraine stays a free country, a democratic country, a country committed to EU and NATO membership. And we will have to do whatever it takes to make sure that indeed this is the end game. And in that sense, I think we need a lot more political resolve, a lot more resources, and a a long-term commitment to Ukraine, including not just economic, political, but also strategic and military.
All right, speaking of political resolve and political will, well, Germany has now ruled out troop deployments during the war, but the foreign minister also suggests peacekeeping under a ceasefire is possible. How should the EU interpret this and kind of navigate through these signals?
Well, look, we will have to do whatever it takes, and ultimately it will be up to Europe, European allies under the umbrella of NATO and the EU to take bold steps. And bold steps also means we will have to have a long-term commitment to not just peace in Ukraine, but a just peace, which will ensure that Ukraine's territorial integrity and Ukraine's European and Western future is assured. And we will need troops from all NATO member states who are going to be willing to contribute. So I'm reading Germany's announcement as a positive sign in this respect.
Right, yeah, you mentioned Ukraine's territorial integrity that needs to be assured. Well, do you think if Ukraine is willing to cede some territory for NATO membership, do you think that would pose a risk to EU principles, or do you think that might offer a new pathway to a lasting peace?
As I said, this is Ukraine's decision ultimately. Ukrainians have to decide what is their best way to a just and lasting peace. And it is their decision. And we will have to stand by and support the decision. But it has to be a decision based on really the best possible circumstances to ensure a just peace. And in that sense, I think we need to listen to the Ukrainians very carefully. But of course, when it comes to territorial integrity, territorial integrity is something which is very important, not just in the case of this conflict, but also for a lasting settlement and lasting peace across Europe. And I think this principle has to be fully safeguarded and respected and taken care of whenever that settlement is there. But let me just say, at the moment, there is heavy fighting in Ukraine. And first and foremost, we should support Ukraine much more at the moment, militarily and strategically, to make sure that Ukraine has the best possible conditions to achieve a just peace.
Right, and I would like to also draw our attention to the EU enlargement. And I was wondering, how does the integration of Serbia into the EU enhance regional security, and what challenges do you think that this process might face?
Well, I'm glad you're raising this question because I spent 5 years in the European Parliament as a standing rapporteur for Serbia. But I see this in a broader sense. Ukraine's invitation to begin accession talks, in fact, the possibility which we gave to Ukraine and Moldova at the start of this brutal invasion by Russia, that Ukraine is a candidate state, has been a game changer for EU enlargement. I think EU enlargement is indeed one of those tools that the European Union and Europeans have to use strategically. Enlargement changed Europe after 1989 for the better. Europe became stronger economically, politically, strategically. And I think this conflict is a change to make the European Union stronger once again, strategically, politically, and economically, but also militarily and in defense terms. And I think in this sense, the progress in enlargement when it comes to Ukraine should go hand in hand with the final fulfillment of a long-standing commitment we've made to the Western Balkans, to countries such as Serbia, Albania, but also others, because this is where the geopolitical fight is going on as well. There is an ongoing attempt to wield greater influence in the region, particularly by Russia, but also China. Serbia is the largest country in the region. It is the battlegrounds for external influence, and I think Europe needs to hold an upper hand. So I think we need to think about enlargement and also inclusion of Serbia in geoeconomic and geostrategic terms, and pick up on every opportunity to also move Serbia in this direction. I hope the Polish EU Council presidency can be an excellent opportunity in this respect.
All right, and let's hope that this opportunity comes into fruition. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of World News Tonight. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVB World.